Good morning, Coldwell Banker George Realty. Welcome to our Friday training. We'll be going over the residential purchase agreement, the grid section specifically, and a few other clauses that I think are important to point out. So I am going to share my screen. We have Peter Cam in the room, so feel free to ask questions. Or if you have something not related to the grid that's been on your mind about some of the contracts, go ahead and we'll have a question time. So, okay. So you should all be able to see my screen. Okay. So this is the RPA package, residential purchase agreement to be specific, and it populates with a disclosure regarding real estate agencies, so that we always need that on any transaction, including leasing. So make sure you're getting that filled out. And this would be checked to, this will be a buyer. Okay, so we're representing a river buyer on this, and you fill out your name and the DRE number. Okay. So now we're going to get to the purchase agreement, and we're going to go over the grid, because I've noticed in the past couple of weeks, there's certain things like we can talk about why we want them checked or we don't want them checked, or, you know, it's up to you and your business, but I'll just give you my opinion on it. So you're going to fill out the confirmation of agency. That's important, and make sure you have the right DRE license numbers. And make sure it's checked who's representing who. So in this case, Coldwell Banker George Realty is representing the seller, and we received an offer from Realty Company. Okay. So the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller is auto checked, and it will populate with this agreement. So we're going to get right into the grid. So the purchase price you're going to insert here, or if it's all cash, you're going to check this box. Close of escrow, it can be anywhere that is acceptable. You always, when you're streamlining for the close of escrow days, you want to make sure if they have a loan, be communicating upfront with the lender, see what kind of timeframes they can make. Because also you have a loan and an appraisal contingency, so you want to talk to the lender to make sure they understand that it's important to stay on your time frame. If not, you're going to shorten or extend them. So the close of escrow, if they say, yeah, we can close in 30 days, sure, you can put 30, but make sure that everybody's good with that prior to just selecting random days. Okay.
And this is the agent buyers.
The buyer's agent should talk to the lender and say, what kind of time frame do you need to close this? How far along are you in the review? You know, you're gonna have a pre-approval letter, but sometimes they're further along in the review process. So you want to make sure how long they think they're going to need. Expiration of offer, I usually just let this default to the 3 calendar days after all buyer signatures, or you can insert a date if you wish. The initial deposit, residential, liquidated damages is up to 3% or what has been deposited into escrow. So most listing agents, if you have not put 3% in here, they're generally going to counter you to 3%. Okay. So there is a cap for residential for liquidated damages. If you only had put 2% in here and somebody was trying to execute on the liquidated damage clause to keep the deposit, the seller would only get 2%. Okay. So listing agents will generally always counter you to 3% of the purchase price. So remember, if the purchase price is being countered and all that, I always put in it purchase price to be an initial deposit to be 3% of purchase price. So just remember to add that just on a counter. Okay. Increased deposits, we don't see that much in residential, but if you do have it, you place it here. Okay.
Michelle, can I ask you a question or wait till the end?
No, go ahead, but talk loud.
I had this property last year, 700,000, and they offered all cash. Then they sent me bank statements, and it said like $15 million, whatever.
Yeah.
Good enough. The property was 700,000. The point I bring up, they they offered $1,000 deposit.
Yeah.
Period. And I go, wait a minute. You guys,
Something wrong.
people got 15 million or, something ridiculous like that. And I said, you know what, that's when I just said, in other words, there's no limit on what the seller could ask for. Well, liquidated damages. If he says all cash, can I put $50,000 down?
You
Okay,
can,
a
but
deposit, of course.
Deposit, yeah.
It's just the liquidated damages will oversee that and see how serious he is.
But if the deposit is more than 3%.
yeah,
Your liquidated damage will be limited to.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
yeah. And I was reading the contract a little bit this morning because I got so busy yesterday. I like to go through everything. But when you're trying to amend, be very careful. Don't amend that liquidated damages. For instance, don't put on your counter and deposit to be released to seller. This agreement even tells you, if you write that verbiage, you are amending the liquidated damage. You need a real estate attorney. We are not real estate attorney. We're a real estate agent. So if you are amending that liquidated damage, you'll see that more in a commercial transaction where they'll release some deposit if it's a big transaction to the seller. If you start amending this liquidated damage and writing that kind of language on your counter, you need to talk to an attorney. Even the agreement is advising you of that. Please don't do that unless you get permission of the broker. Don't, please, because the liquidated damage is written by the lawyers and it follows the law. If we start messing with it on a counter offer, be careful, because you see people writing stuff like that in a counter. So if you're going to try to amend a liquidated damage clause or arbitration, ask Peter Cam first before you send something like that out. This is specific legal written paragraphs in our agreement, okay? Because I've seen that lately, so be careful on that. So the loan amount here, you put the whatever the loan amount's gonna be. This defaults to a conventional loan. If it's something else, go ahead and check it. I like to put the not to exceed there, because what if the buyer was thinking they were gonna get a 6 or a 7% interest rate and it ends up being 8. So I recommend that you put a not to exceed there as well, okay? And then if there points, put whatever the lender's telling you there, and that the buyer's in agreement to paying. If it's 0 points, 1 point, 2 points, whatever. I like this filled out completely.
So, Michelle, quick question. So when you say not to exceed 6.5, that means that their interest rate is around 7 points or 6.8 or something like that?
I don't know,
No,
but
okay.
it's
But that's-
whatever the lender tells you. What do you have to say, Peter?
Well, if you said not to exceed 6.5, and if the lender's rate is 7, then there's no deal.
There's no deal.
Right.
Don't even bother.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to, if you're a buyer's agent, you don't want to kill any deals. Just ask the lender, hey, what's the interest rate gonna be? I'm gonna insert it on the offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why you need to be talking to the lender while you're submitting, so that you know if there's points, you know what the interest rate is. You wanna, be proactive for your own client.
So be in constant contact with the lender.
While
I'm
you're
not-
writing,
while
make
you're writing,
sure
okay.
that you know the interest rate, okay? Additional financed amount, I generally, I don't think I've ever seen this on a transaction that I've been involved with, but that could happen, so make sure you're filling this out the same way. Remember, this does go to conventional unless you check a box here to make it a different type. Occupancy type is defaults to primary unless you check secondary or investment property. So G1, seller credit, if any, to buyer. You can insert a dollar amount here, which it'll populate. Let me just do it. It's gonna populate the percentage, so let me put. Okay. And this defaults, if you put anything here, it's gonna default to closing costs, okay? So if you are going to ask for credit on closing costs in a competitive market, we're not seeing that as much, but if you do, communicate with the lender, because if you put too much there that the lender can't handle, then that's off the table at closing. If you put 10,000 and the lender's only able to provide 8,000, they don't get that extra 2,000 off the price. And it will say that in the body of the agreement.
Do you have a reason for the credit?
The reason for the credit could be closing costs. Yes, that's the default. You know, normally, I think in a competitive market, you're not seeing it as much. I don't know Peter's opinion on that, but I haven't seen a lot of people pre-asking, have you? For
Well,
credit?
But still, there are.
Okay.
That, you know, they want the seller to supplement the closing cost.
Yeah,
That's normal, there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah. Just make sure you know what the lender can handle, okay? Because you don't want to get them to get it closing and feel like they lost 2,000,
But
okay?
still is reasonable.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yeah. So, I hope you can hear on Zoom. They were asking what's the reason for the credit. It generally is for closing costs, but they do have a box for other. But again, you need to check with the lender. If you check other and write another, reason in here, and this is not commission. So okay, so Q3 is where you're always gonna check the box to populate, to add form SPBB for your compensation, for the buyer broker compensation. Remember, SPBB cannot be more than your BRBC or your the open house form. You cannot charge a seller on an SPBB or ask the seller to pay 3% if you only asked for 2.5 on your SPBB. So please, you know, make sure if you really want 3%, that you are getting a commission agreement with 3% on it, then you can ask. The seller has a right to counter that amount. They can either accept it, counter it, or reject it, okay? Verification of all cash, just as we were talking, sufficient funds. This is generally provided via bank statements, or maybe they have a stock account that they can turn liquid, something like that. But if you are obtaining the verification of all cash for your client, if you're reviewing the package that they sent one, make sure it is the same name of the buyer. Because we've had them turned in where it wasn't matching who was on the contract. Buyer's name needs to match. Also, the date. Make sure the date is pretty current, okay? Same thing with verification of down payment and closing costs. That's generally submitted as we call it in the business, proof of funds. Check the name on those proof of funds, and also check the dates. Sometimes the lender's gonna provide the verification, right? So you could even check with the lender. Verification of loan application, you attach to the offer, or it defaults to 3 days, or you can amend the days here. I think you're a lot stronger if you come in with, you know, your pre-approval or, you know, fully underwritten pre-approval, but check a box and make sure that you talk to the lender and you have that to attach. Final verification of condition of the property. You have 5 days prior to COE, or you can insert the days. When you are walking the final verification of condition, you may want to go out a little bit sooner. If you've negotiated repairs, you want to make sure that you have the receipts or the, you know, the material receipts or invoices from vendors that may have done the repairs. Make sure that you're gathering that for the buyer from the agent, the listing agent, if the seller agreed to do repairs. You can kind of take a look around on the final verification to make sure there's no paint, stuff like that, left in the garage that your client would have to dispose of. any debris, just look for stuff like that and be communicating with the other agent. Also, if you're a listing agent, you always want to prepare your seller, like we need to clear this property unless we agree to that, that the buyer is taking some items, okay? Or agrees that you can leave it. Because I have seen garages left with a lot of paint and things that somebody was like, hey, I don't want to dispose of that. So we need to be preparing both sides to properly deliver the property, okay? Assignment of request. I like that they added this. Assignment request, they have 17 days after acceptance, or you can amend it, okay? So loans, the loan contingency and appraisal, this is all pretty much lined up to 17 days. The loan is 17 days, or you check no loan contingency, no appraisal contingency can be checked. Be careful checking those unless, you're absolutely certain that, they can handle it if that appraisal doesn't come in or, at the right amount. So always be really communicating with them. Investigation of property. There's a lot of investigations like the home inspection. You may want to do the termite inspection. They also call out in paragraph 12 about lead-based paint, things of that nature. So all the inspections, you can't damage the property, but you can do the normal inspections. If it's something that's more invasive, you need to have the seller's permission. Like some people will put I don't know what it's called. I'm going to call it a scope, but down to look at the sewer. You need to let the seller know. One house that we were at, it wouldn't fit down the toilet. So they asked for permission to remove the toilet. If it broke, they were going to give us a brand new one, but it didn't break. So they put it right back on. So there's some things that are a little more invasive. Make sure you're asking permission. Okay. And the sewer scope is pretty good. It's a good thing if your buyer wants to do that. I think it's a good inspection. Informational access to the property, you usually want to line it up with the investigation or maybe a couple of days later. This is where they can go and inspect and maybe measure, start bringing, if you allow them, bring a contractor in so they can look at what they want to do on the property. This is not a cancellation paragraph, or does it create a contingency, but it allows the clients to come in and, measure, do those types of things if they wish, or any other, information they need. They may want to come in and shut the door and listen to traffic. I don't know, but let them come in, line it up with your investigation of property contingency. So it's lined up to be removed at the same time. Or if you think they need a couple more days on that one, that should be fine. But make sure that your clients understand what that is, okay? Insurance, they have separated it, 17 days. But if you remove all of your inspection contingency, that will also grab that insurance. So make sure when you are doing a contingency removal, you remove everything except you can check the insurance box if you haven't gotten that situated with your client yet. Okay, if the client hasn't gotten that situated. Review of seller documents, you have 17 days. If they're late delivering them, you have 5 days after receipt. So we don't want to be responsible as agents for extending this. So make sure you're ready to deliver those documents as soon as possible. Okay. Because if you deliver it on the 16th day, you're extending your contingency by another 4 days because you were late, because they have 5 days after delivery to review it. Preliminary title report, again, it's 17 days, or it even says here 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. Preliminary title report, make sure that you're reading it. Call the title officer, not your title rep. There's a title officer up in the right-hand corner of that first page of the prelim. Call them, say, I've read it. I don't notice anything. Is there anything you can point me to that I need to be paying attention to? They will go over it. It only takes 5 to 10 minutes. They will do that for you over the phone. As a listing agent, it's a very good practice to be in. Even if you say, hey, there's nothing here, I don't notice anything, that is their job. They will help you. So always call the title officer. It takes 5 to 10 minutes, okay? The common interest disclosures, HOA docs, make sure if you're a listing agent, you're ordering those early. You don't want to get caught up with an HOA that's not gonna follow your time frame. They won't, they follow their time frame. So make sure you're ordering those early. Lease or lien, review of lease or lien, items like a solar panel, propane tank. There's water softeners that are also leased, I found out. So make sure if that's on the property as a listing agent that you are asking for those ahead of time. If the sale of the buyer's property is a contingency, make sure that you do check that box and it'll populate the form for that particular contingency. There is a removal or waiver of contingencies. You can check that. We don't recommend it. It's against right here, the agent's advice. We don't recommend that you just go out and remove contingencies. For instance, though, if you're cash, you know, you've already pre-removed that on the offer for the loan. Maybe the appraisal doesn't matter, but if you're cash, you can still leave an appraisal contingency in play, okay? So time of possession, pay attention to this because you need to make sure that the seller would be ready to go if you leave this to default upon notice of recordation. So if they need a little bit longer, make sure that you are specifying it in the TOPA. You know, if they can't move out the day that that thing closes or they're not ready, or maybe the close date may not be exactly where they thought, make sure you're covering them with some extra days if that's what they wish. Then down here, you're gonna see that you would need a form. If it's 29 days or fewer, you need an SIP form. And that could even be close of escrow plus 2 days. Just do the form. It protects everybody legally. If it's gonna be 30 days or more, you need a residential lease after the sale agreement, okay? So like I said, if it is even COE plus 2 days, do the form, just so that everybody's protected legally, buyer and seller. Yeah, and then if the unit is occupied or the house is occupied by anyone other than the seller, who's the seller? The one on title. If there are occupants that are 18 and above in that property, you know, I recommend a TOPA. Minor children, we're not worried about, but if anybody is of adult age, make sure that you're as a buyer's agent asking, are there any other occupants other than the seller? And by seller, the car attorneys say it is meaning the person on title, okay? Because they may have an uncle that lives there, but make sure that you're asking those questions so there's no surprise. Seller delivery of documents, you have 7 days after acceptance of the contract unless you amend that. So it's good to have those done right up front. Sign in return escrow holder provisions. I like that they put this in because sometimes people for some reason drag out signing the escrow instructions. As soon as those come out, you should get those signed ASAP. Now, some of us aren't comfortable. We don't want to go through the escrow documents. That's okay. Call your escrow officer, say, I'll be down with my clients. The escrow officer will be very happy to walk them through with you sitting there and they can sign, okay? So if you don't want to go through them yourself with the client, take your client over to escrow, or escrow can talk directly to them, okay? Time to pay for, Mhm.
Michelle,
Yeah,
if the house is a condominium and you have HOA documents and stuff, does the escrow automatically provide the HOA fees? Or do you have to?
we have to ask.
You have to.
Yeah, I think it's down in the, yeah, it's down here. And let's see. Let me see. HOA transfer fees. HOA fee for preparing the disclosures defaults to the seller.
But the HOA, every month you're supposed to pay the HOA fee.
Oh,
Do you have
yes.
to prorate it automatically, or do you have to ask particularly the?
Oh, good point, Peter. Yeah, okay, so what Peter's saying, in case you can't hear on Zoom, what about properties that are residing in an HOA? How do you make sure that the HOA is up to date, the monthly payments, and it's not behind? I will check on that, but I believe the ones that I've been involved in, the escrow officer is checking with the HOA.
Mhm.
And if there's any default, then the seller will credit the buyer,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, not default, but if there's any lagging payments or late payment, then the seller needs to credit to buyer to clear that up. But yeah, good point, Peter. I didn't even think of that. Make sure that the escrow officer is checking with the HOA to ensure that they are paid up to date at time of closing. So that if there's a credit needed, then you can make sure you get it. Okay. Yeah, that's very important. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Time to pay fees for ordering the HOA docs. This agreement does default to 3 days after acceptance, so make sure you're on that right away. Of course, you can amend it if you need to. Installing of smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heater, bracing 7 days after acceptance. That can be done, and you'll see in the grid by the buyer or the seller, but it's generally a seller thing to do because they have access to the property. So I'll show you down where it asks evidence of representation authority, meaning if this is in a trust, if it's an LLC corporation, 3 days after acceptance, that documentation needs to be provided to title, but it'll go through your escrow officer. So make sure that if there is a corporation, LLC, trust, make sure that your client knows that as either the seller or the buyer, and they have the evidence for the escrow officer who will provide it to title. Do you have any comments on that?
I have a question, that same property, Michelle, it was falling down. And the investor was gonna rehab it, the whole thing. My question was, why am I gonna put a smoke detector? Why am I gonna brace the heater? The seller's expense if the investor's gonna come in.
Well, you can put it to the buyer.
Oh,
There
that's
is a way to
how
flip it to the buyer. I'll show
You
you.
mentioned as is in the beginning of the class.
Yeah, but this is a law. This is,
That's what I'm saying.
this is
it's
a law.
right.
so you either,
Even if the house is falling down.
Right.
You gotta comply.
right, and we've done that
Okay.
on really junk places.
Right.
We've still installed, right,
No,
Peter?
I
It's a law, but you can make you can make it to the buyer expense. I'll show you how.
Right, okay.
So items included in the sale, make sure that you're going over this with your buyer, because there would be nothing worse than them thinking they had that beautiful stainless steel refrigerator and it was gone. This is another thing you're going to verify on your final walkthrough. If you have negotiated for any items to be left, make sure that they are there. If that fountain or potted plant, they even let you check a box here. Anything that you want left on that property on your final VP, you're going to make sure it's there. And you're going to make sure that you write it in here. Or check, if they have a checkbox, check it. Okay, so make sure that you're going through this with your buyer. I have seen disputes over a refrigerator, so you don't want to be caught thinking, oh my God, I might have to buy a refrigerator. So just make sure that you're checking the appropriate box.
For the important items, you better make it specific.
Yes.
Don't assume anything. you know?
Nope.
Because like, one time they have a statue there, the buyer was expecting the statue to
Right.
remain. But the seller said, hey, this is a special statue, I have to remove it. And they did remove it from the close of vessel. And the buyer was devastated, they don't know, what happened to my beautiful statue there? So.
Yeah.
A big dispute that, after the close of vessel.
Yeah, I've seen some big fights. You know, a lot of them, there's these really, you know, it could be $100,000 chandelier hanging in an entryway. Make sure as a listing agent, if you see something hanging and attached, are you excluding that or letting it go with the property? Because they'll think in their head, oh, they know I'm not including that, of course, because I paid 100,000. Well, we don't know. We have to ask. Be very careful on those kind of things, because I've seen disputes over chandeliers. You know, you got to make sure that you're on your toes and you're asking as a listing agent, even as a buyer's agent, okay? So whatever is excluded, you may not know when you're making the offer, but if the listing agent already told you, hey, the chandelier is excluded and you want your offer to be cleaner, you can write it in as excluded, but they may just exclude things on a counter because you may not know right up front, okay? So the natural hazards disclosure report, you see that it could be a buyer, seller, or both paying. It's generally a seller expense, but that is negotiable. You know, the buyer can pay for it or they can split the cost, whatever. I always recommend checking the environmental box. It's maybe $20 more on that report. I just think it gives you a wealth of information. So I always check for the environmental. You're going to click here to put your favorite NHD company in that's going to provide it. And this now G2 is something somewhat new, but this is an optional wildfire disclosure. Again, operative word being optional. I understand that this report can cost $140 as one person told me. So that's optional. Have you heard about the report, Peter? Yeah, so yeah, most people are leaving it and they're not checking it. And most of the contracts we're reviewing, they're not checking it. So here,
Well, it depends on what location the property is on.
right, that the
on the foothill,
FHDS, yeah, there's the fire disclosure, right? So in the NHD, it's gonna say if it's in a high or very high fire zone. You may want to check that, and then maybe if that's the case, maybe you want to get the report. That's up to you. But you want to kind of know the zone it's in, and that will be disclosed to you on an NHD report. If you want to find out ahead of time, you can call, even if it's not our listing, you can call the NHD company, check the address for me. Is this in a high or very high fire zone? So that you know ahead of time. Okay?
Michelle,
Yes.
this is Doug. Okay, I've got an upcoming listing in the high fire zone, and I was recommended by NHD not to order that report. Just get a defensible space inspection from Cal Fire. It's free, and they'll come out within a few days. And
Oh,
just
great.
they walk around the property, about 10 items they check. If something needs to be addressed, they'll let you know. Otherwise, you just give that to the buyer.
Oh, that's wonderful information, Doug. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's right in the front of the NHD. If it's in
Yeah.
high fire, the email address is there. I did it yesterday. It was pretty simple.
Oh, that's good. And so you were satisfied with it.
Yeah, they're gonna go out and do an inspection, pre-inspection.
Great. So see, that's good to know. So you don't have to check this and have somebody pay 140 or whatever the cost is. Q3 here allows for reports. This could be a termite report, but remember, a termite report doesn't equal Section 1 termite clearance. So some people forget that the termite report is simply a report. If you want work done and you want somebody to pay other than your client, the buyer, then you need to check for the seller and put Section 1 termite clearance report. That will mean that the work is done. Okay. So smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, and water heater bracing, this is where you can check it to the buyer or the seller. So if you have a tear down, as they were mentioning in the room here, you may want to check it that the buyer will do it. Okay. And presumably there's not a loan on a tear down. There could be. But just so you know, when appraisers come out, they're looking for smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, and water heater strapping. and they will take pictures. So, if you are the seller responsible for these things and you cause a re-inspection fee because you weren't ready, then you will be responsible to pay that fee if the appraiser has to come back, okay? And, you know, we just had a property where the water heater was strapped. We kind of looked in the dark area and looked. We could see the straps, but then they got called out as not the right straps. We didn't know that, but it didn't cause a reinspection. We just put the right strapping on. Okay, so that can happen too. So, you know, we're not contractors. Looking at metal strappings would not know that, but that was okay. They just said, just put the other metal strapping on, okay? Government required point of sale, inspection and reports. As a habit, if I'm representing a buyer, I'm always gonna check to the seller, and I'm gonna check that the government required point of sale correction, remedial actions be paid for by the seller. Most listing agents are going to be looking at these boxes and taking them back to the buyer or unchecking them from the seller. But when you are going to make an offer, make sure that you know factually if there's a inspection report. The problem is if there's a list, like let's say the title company provide us an inspection, you know, cities that have inspection. I think things rapidly change, so you can call the city yourself and see if there's a point of sale report. That may not cover all of the reports, but you at least do that homework. Make sure that you know that, who has, Southgate has a point of sale requirement.
Monterey Park.
No, they took, Monterey Park, canceled it,
What?
which is nice.
How about Pasadena? They used to have them.
Yeah, I'm not sure anymore, but, yeah, I just went through a couple of deals where it's required, so you need to make sure.
I have a question. Even though it's not required, can you ask the city to come in for inspection, by the way?
Oh, I don't think, okay, so there is some language and that's a good question. This is a stumping question. There is some language where as a buyer's agent, you can't cause government inspections on a property. Yeah, like you're not supposed to be doing that.
Like,
Yeah.
If you put in the RPA and saying that, yeah, in spite of the fact that the city doesn't require the inspection, nevertheless, you can arrange for that kind of inspection.
I guess if it's, so Peter's saying, we're not supposed to just call the city out on a house, but if you agree to it in a, offer, in a contract, can you do that? I think you could. Yeah. And there's companies, by the way, that you can pay, I think last time we did it, it was when we were representing a buyer, $75. And they'll research all of the database as much as they can, looking for permits and non-permits and all of that. So as a buyer's agent, it's not a bad idea to say, you know, do you want to pay the $75? Do not go to the city for your buyer, though. If they need you to give them a ride, give them a ride. I've done that before, but stand back, let them talk to the counter. You don't want to be responsible for pulling, you know, because if you didn't get everything from the city and you told them here, this is it, you could be, you know, liable. So be careful on that. But there are companies that you can pay.
I think that's a good idea. You know,
It's a great idea.
physical inspection report, you just tag in you know, the additional requirement for that inspection.
Right.
And you know, it's peace of mind there because if you have a lot of unpermitted remodeling, there can be a lot of trouble. They don't have.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but Shumay is a big believer in getting you know, those types of reports, and the $75 is very nominal if you find something you weren't aware of. I mean, it more than pays for itself, so it's a good idea to do that. Yeah, I agree, Peter. And yes, you can negotiate that in the contract if you wish.
And the biggest one's LA, right? The 9A report?
Yeah, 9A.
They still have.
Yeah, 9A is still a requirement. Yeah. Escrow fees, each to pay their own fee. You can either specify an escrow company, or you can put seller preference, same with owner's title insurance policy. You could check that to the seller, that these are pretty standard that they pay that. And I always put seller preference, or you can put your title company. Depends on how competitive the property is. But you can try, because they can counter you. If they're not going to allow you to have it, then they'll counter you. Buyer's lender title insurance policy, that is paid by default by the buyer. It's part of their closing costs, okay? County and city transfer taxes, make sure you don't miss checking these. This is always, in my experience, I always check it to the seller. It's been a rare occasion where I've seen that countered back, unless it's like a tear down or, you know, something that somebody feels is under market. But go ahead and check the boxes to the seller is my advice. But if it's real competitive, and you can call escrow and ask them to help you figure out how much these taxes would be, or you can call title if you're checking it to the buyer, okay? I saw somebody accidentally put both on these, so just make sure that you're checking to the seller. So HOA fee for preparing disclosure, it defaults to the seller. HOA certification fee, which is explained, they don't have a paragraph on that. This is explained in L2, yeah, 11L2. I like these reference paragraphs, because if it's something I don't understand, I'm always going to flip to that paragraph and read it, okay? HOA transfer fees. Unless otherwise agreed, seller shall pay for separate HOA move-out fee, and buyer shall pay for move-in fee. So, but you still need to check a box here. I recommend, if it's, you're representing, I didn't check it because I was assuming we were talking about SFR here, but if you're in a condominium or something with an HOA, make sure you're checking to the seller. Private transfer fees, this defaults automatically to the seller, so that you don't have to check if you're representing the buyer. Fees or costs, Anna can jump in. I think we put the CBGR compliance fee here.
What's a private transfer fee, Michelle? Like an example of one.
Good question. I'm not sure.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We'll look at.
Yeah, I can find out. I don't know. I haven't seen one. Have you, Peter?
Those are the, like, the extra fees that they take into the, you know, property. And it specified that, what is it for, and how much is it? Now, some of them have, some of them don't, you know.
Would that be laid into a title report, or not
Yeah, it should be.
necessarily, or it should be? Okay, so that's a good, another question for the title officer. You can ask them. Yeah, okay, so the title officer should be able to answer that too, right? When you're talking to the title officer, go ahead and ask them if they see any miscellaneous fees tied to this property in the title report. So
Is he a hard money lender or something like that?
could be.
Something involved.
So I'm gonna type compliance fee. Oh, compliance fee is already there. Buyer. And I'm gonna put a cap on it. So CBGR compliance fee, $295. You can check to the buyer, because I doubt the seller would pay your compliance fee. So go ahead and put that in for the seller. I mean, for the buyer, excuse me. Home warranty. The buyer can waive it, but if they're going to waive it, you need to check the box. I always recommend you ask the seller to pay for a home warranty plan. Call your home warranty rep and asking them if there's a certain plan you should be typing in on the agreement, because sometimes there's plans that are, you know, better than the other, and they're not much more cost. Ask them about the cost, and ask them about, is there a specific plan that you should type in? I always ask the seller to pay. The buyer can waive it, but if they do, you need to check the box. And let the buyer pick the home warranty company. You know, that's something the buyer should be picking, not the seller, is my opinion, so. Okay. So that is the grid. I do want to go over, I highlighted it on my sample here. I want to go over a couple of paragraphs that I think are really good to pay attention to and to read a couple of times. So paragraph 9 to me is super important as an agent so that you learn what is automatically included in a sale. Because if something in here is something that the seller does not want to leave as an automatic inclusion in that sale, you need to counter it out. Curtains, drapery, shutters, the rods, things like that, satellite dishes, air coolers. I had to counter out a window air conditioner because the seller was adamant about taking their window air conditioner, which was kind of weird. But anyway, make sure you know these things because people get very possessive over, you know, some of their things sometimes. So we need to understand what is automatically included, because if you don't understand it, you can't counter it out. So make sure you're reading this. Okay. Let's see. Excuse me while I fumble through my paperwork. There we go. Is there any questions while I'm looking for something else I want to point out?
Yeah, Michelle,
Go ahead.
most of those items you mentioned earlier, it can be put onto our template, right? Our purchase term template. And then all set into that template.
Okay, so he's asking, can all of this be put on a template? Yeah, right, Peter, it's in our templates. So that's what Anna's been working on. We update our templates as these contracts and more forms have come on. It's updated. So I'm,
Another question.
go ahead.
Is our buyer commission or seller commission, are they restricted? It has to be or it's still negotiable,
All negotiable.
open, right?
Everything is negotiable.
Every negotiable.
Yeah,
CBGR has
Well,
to get
that's
10%.
the most important.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's the focus version, they have all the templates and all the list of documents there.
Really? Just like the car documents or the?
The car documents, yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
all right, cause I used to go to car website and grab all
Oh, you
Yeah,
can do
no,
that,
it was
but
zip form plus.
it's more convenient with the focus version.
of
Check
them.
with Diana.
You hear that?
so they're talking about that check about the broker's version, so that you have the templates for the deals. Also on our website, we do have lists for each transaction. So if you're like me and you like paper and you like to check off that list that you have it, I mean, that's how I do it. So you can go either way, but the templates are there for you. I want to show you in 14 B2. So the contract is an as-is contract, and it says right here, buyer may within the time specified in the grid, request that seller make repairs or take other action regarding the property. And right here, the seller has no obligation to agree or to respond to the buyer's request. If the seller does not agree or does not respond, buyer is not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made and may only cancel based on contingencies in the agreement. So if it's something in the inspection that the seller won't remedy and the buyer can't live with, use your cancellation rights. Okay, so because people, when I always tell people this is an as-is contract, it's in black and white, just so you know.
What paragraph is that?
That is 14B2. Okay. So I'm gonna go to the back of the
Even if it's as is contract, you can still negotiate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course, yeah.
you know, don't be shy about it, you know?
Yeah, even, because I think you were mentioning yesterday, that, Yes, always ask. Even though, like, let's say a seller countered that they're not gonna do a section 1 termite clearance, but then the buyer said, you know, after all of the inspections, I want that. You could go ahead and ask. It doesn't hurt to ask on a request for repair. Even if the agent's like, as is, you know, go ahead and ask because you need to do your best for your client. Okay, so I always say it doesn't hurt to ask. If they say yes, great. If they say no, you know, you have something to discuss with your buyer, but always try hard and ask. Okay. Liquidated damages is here. Of course, the buyer and seller need to initial and arbitration here. If there's a counter, you know, make sure that you have reviewed that both parties have initialed this so that they are effective, okay?
Now, when you're talking about the mediation and arbitration process, you should explain to your client, you know, what is a good advantage and a disadvantage. of
Okay.
Mediation or arbitration, because arbitration, although it is easier and it takes less time, but it can be more expensive than a regular lawsuit,
Ah,
because you have to pay for the retired judge. And the retired judge usually charge about $700 to $750 per hour. Of
So-
time. So see, if you're using the court system, the judge don't charge you that, right? But if you are using the arbitration, the arbitrator will charge you $700 per hour.
Wow.
so do you recommend that?
That's all you have to tell them.
Talk to them about it, okay.
There's the pros and cons about mediation and arbitration. Some people don't like the arbitration.
Clause.
Because they said, well, you know, I have a better chance, with the jury.
Okay,
When you come to a lawsuit, you know?
Right.
The arbitration, you only have one person to say.
Yeah, you don't have the judge decide.
okay,
It's not a,
That's interesting.
yeah, it's a formal and also not as a detailed procedure. But then also the arbitration, after the arbitration, no appeal.
Yeah, you can.
it's just one decision done, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
I understand,
One and done.
yeah.
Oh,
So that's why you have to talk to them about it. And most of the agents say, oh yeah, let's do the arbitration mediation without even thinking about it. You know?
Wow.
guilty. Yeah.
And so mediation is the court system, right? You let-
No, mediation is out of the court system.
Private.
Yeah, private, and mediation is not binding. Arbitration is. And there's no appeal for the arbitration.
Have you, Peter, since we're talking about arbitration, have you seen, contracts, for us that have gone to arbitration? Have we, or does that not happen that much?
Well, when before the lawsuit, there should be some type of mediation and arbitration, and after that, if they are not successful, then you go ahead with it.
Oh, okay,
The lawsuit.
okay,
That's more of a, you know, normal,
process.
process.
Oh, okay. I hope you guys could hear it. I turned the speaker towards the room. Yes, go ahead.
The top part of this page. The buyer still not initial until now. This one, yeah, 26 buyer's initial is missing.
If buyer selection, then it's not binding.
Yeah,
So we opened the escrow already, then I have a talked to the other side agent. She said, yes, I will ask the buyer to sign, but until now, still not signed, and escrow company knows too, okay? So last night and then this morning, I still text to the other side agent, said, would you please have this signed today?
Then you have to do an amendment on the escrow instruction.
And
With the both parties agree to the liquidated.
okay, but our side signed already, okay? The buyer side is still missing, just that one place,
but it's, yeah, like
No,
Peter
it-
said,
yeah.
it's not.
You cannot go back and.
Right.
We still have, Yeah, you have to make an amendment, when the both parties agree to that particular issue, okay? And in other words, you cannot just go back to the original RPA and say, hey, you forgot this initial. Because you have signed it already, that becomes a separate contract.
I
So
get it.
I have to do the addendum now, right?
You have to do the amendment.
Amendment.
So, one of the, when I was watching, I think it was a car attorney. They were saying that a lot of times we'll get a counter offer back, right? But it doesn't have the whole offer attached. Which I hate. And the thing is, they were saying if you wanted these paragraphs in play. Before you sign on the dotted line, say, hey, can you send me page blah, blah? You need to make sure that these are initialed. If your client wanted that initialed and they didn't send you back the whole offer subject to the attached counter offer, make sure you're asking ahead of time. That was one of the tips from an attorney, because what happened with you, they're saying if one side only signed this and they only sent you a counter, you didn't have the whole offer, guess what? Yeah, it's not signed. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Michelle,
Yes.
when we get this in the buyer and, the buyer order, property investment and, investor, they go back to the property and they go up the book, and they, invest in about the book, if the investor, they pay down on the book, and who will be responsibility and be liable.
That's legal.
Again, they,
I mean, the investor, they go down to property and they do investing. And they go up the book, if they fail out on the book, and who will be responsibility? And be liable for
The owner.
yeah.
I would
I-
let them on the roof.
Depends on, see, if.
the buyer, because the buyer pay money and to kind it.
Well, if you're doing a physical inspection, the guy should have a license, and they should have workman's comp. And if they don't, then you're tough, and whoever's it's a property owner at the time will be responsible for that.
No, I think so.
If they don't, if that person doesn't have a workman's comp.
Yes, because,
That's why you have to make sure that you hire a reputable.
yes,
Yeah,
someone with a
inspection,
license.
Yeah, the one with the license.
Yeah.
If they have the license, then most likely they have the workman's comp
Yeah.
for the workers.
I have another thing too,
When I get not so,
Oh.
but I think so.
when we did an open house, I remember my client, the seller, she was a little bit, she would call me for like every 20 minutes and, she would say like, I went to the house and I
Right, from
noticed
the
that
speaker.
I noticed that the curtain was open and the light was off and all that, and I said, oh, it's probably one of the agents. I go, yeah, an agent called me and he wanted to go take a client for an inspection. In fact, it was the investor that was already promised to buy the property. They just went over to go check and all that stuff and, like you said, do some measurements and stuff. Then she would say, you know what, I kind of don't like that, we're still in escrow and hasn't been fully signed. And she's like, what if he goes over there and falls and breaks his head, are we liable? Do we have to pay for all that stuff? And,
I think homeowners insurance, right, Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I said, well, if he's a professional that's going over there to check like the roof or a plumber or anything like that, and he falls and all that, and I said the same thing. I said, I'm going to make sure they get someone that's licensed and bonded,
Yeah.
so.
Sometimes when they check it up lumber, and if they go in the wind, they go in something,
Yeah,
And-
or when it's something break or something
Yeah.
like that, like they'll do
and the
a,
owner not happy. and
Yeah,
they
sometimes
they
the
go
owner-
back. to,
Well, if they break something, I
Yeah.
believe the contract calls that they need to repair it. You can't cause damage to somebody's property by walking on their you know, nobody should be walking on a tiled roof, for instance, you know, you're gonna break tiles. That's why, like Peter said, make sure it's a licensed contractor, bonded, insured, or don't let you know, like an investor, even though they think, you know, oh, I do this all the time, probably shouldn't be on top of a roof without, unless they're a licensed, bonded, insured contractor, you know? I have had people ask to go on the roof and I say, oh, no, the seller doesn't want you on the roof. You know, because if you want that, then you need to get a roofing contractor, somebody with a license. Any other questions? I hope you guys could hear. I turned the speaker out.
Regarding open houses. Let's say a buyer walk in and they refuse to sign a little contract. Can we tell them to go away? I mean, hey, you
No,
don't
give him a flyer.
until you sign.
You give him a flyer. Just give him
No.
a flyer, have a good day.
I mean,
They
like.
can walk around, they can walk around and
Yeah,
they
they
can
don't
look
have
at
to-
the,
they don't have to-
whatever that's available in that, on
Yeah,
the
they-
table, you know, they can go on. But you don't answer any of their questions and you don't show them around, you know?
Yeah, yeah, because, you know, a new operation, a new law, kind of like, don't know
Yeah.
what's.
This is out of line.
Yeah, I was
My
listening
own
to
days.
a recording that they did, and they had these attorneys, and they said that there was a story where agents were turning people
Yeah.
away because they wouldn't sign the paper. And they said, you are ruining a potential opportunity
Yeah.
for a client.
Yep.
Says you don't wanna do that. When they walk in, ask them if they wanna sign it. If they don't wanna sign it, just give them the paper and tell them, have a
Yep.
wonderful day. And if they do have an agent, to say, have your agent call me and we can discuss the details and all that stuff.
Let's say they want to go see the property anyway, would they allow them?
Yeah, you
Yes.
they can stay there, they can just walk around.
Because they're public and so.
You don't have to entertain them.
Yeah, like an old day, you know, everybody can walk in free.
So
Same thing.
what they're talking about, so you can hear on Zoom, is if somebody walks into your open house and refuses to sign your open house form, should you just tell them to leave? No, let them walk the property, give them your flyer, and that's it. Yeah, but don't tell them, you know, oh, you need to leave.
Or
So,
not about the cookie, what if they choke and they?
any other questions on Zoom?
Then we gotta give them advisory for not to, you know?
Let me see if there's anything in the chat, then we'll conclude on the recording. Okay, so thank you very much for showing up for the training. We appreciate it. Thank you all, and we'll be with you next Friday. We're gonna be doing the disclosures for the residential disclosures. Thank you
Thank
all
you,
so much.
Michelle.
Enjoy your
Thank-
weekend.
Thank
Okay,
you.
okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
That was very good.